Okay, Հակոբ, կարող եք սկսեք։
Շնորհակալություն Ջորա։ Բարև ձեզ բոլորիդ. Hello everybody. This is the ARPA Institute panel discussion on Armenians in Turkey. I welcome you all and thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. As you may know, ARPA Institute is an organization of experts that has been working in Armenia mainly for the last 30 years. This year is the 30th anniversary of the ARPA Institute, and we are celebrating it by holding a one-day conference on Armenia and Armenians and the diaspora, essentially, at the California State University Northridge on June 11, and it will be followed by a celebratory banquet at the Sheraton Universal Hotel. So I would like to invite you all to attend, and you can go to our website, arpainstitute.org, and make your reservations both for tickets and for the conference. If you make a reservation for the conference, you get a free ticket for parking, and also the same for the banquet. So ARPA Institute works with the government of Armenia, the institutes of the Academy of Sciences, as well as the universities. We have programs ongoing, especially the most important one right now is building a clean room, a class 1000 clean room in the Alekhanian National Lab, which will be the first clean room of its class. And this is very important for researchers so they can do research in Armenia rather than going to other countries to carry out their research. The construction part is almost over, and now we are beginning to purchase the necessary instrumentation for research and development. And so we need your help to complete the clean room. So if you can, please donate to the ARPA Institute specifically for this purpose. You can again donate if you go to our website, arpainstitute.org, and you will see the donate button, and you can donate online. We also have other programs like, for example, we have started for several years now the process of science fairs for students in all schools of Armenia. We are working with the government, with the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sports, and they have been actually formally now organizing the science fair for the last 2 years. And also we have helped them for the winners to participate in the International Science and Engineering Fair, which is held every year in the US. So for the last 2 years, we are sponsoring students from Armenia, the winners of the science fair, to participate in the ISEF as well. We also have our annual invention competition for young scientists, and they can present any invention in any field, and we will send it to experts for evaluation, and then we'll determine the best and award them. We also work with several institutes of the Academy of Sciences, the Molecular Biology Institute, the Physical Research Institute in Ashtarak, the Alekhanian National Lab, the Chemical Physics Institute, and many other institutes, as well as the Yerevan State University and the Polytechnic University. And now we have even started with working with the Russian Armenian University. The main objective, of course, for us is to develop Armenia in any field that we can. Our experts also work with the Ministry of Health, developing new technologies for digitization of the healthcare system in Armenia. And now we're happy to have a panel of experts with us today who will be discussing the subject of Armenians in Turkey. Has anything changed since the Ottoman Empire? And our moderator will be Dr. Lerna Ekmekcioglu. Lerna is a PhD and an associate professor of history at MIT. Her research is on genocide, on the late Ottoman Empire, early Turkish Republic, and minorities, and especially the Armenian survivors of the genocide. Her first monograph is on recovering Armenia, the limits of belonging in post-genocide Turkey. And it was published by the Stanford University Press in 2016. In 2006, she has co-edited a volume in Turkish on the first 5 Armenian Ottoman feminists. Currently, she is collaborating with Dr. Melissa Bilal at UCLA for a book and a digital humanities project titled Feminism in Armenian, an interpretive anthology and documentary archive. Lerna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hagop. It is my great pleasure really to moderate this panel, which is all about what I have been working in the last almost 2 decades now and where I am from. I'll keep the introductions short so that we have more time for the conversation. I will introduce each panelist by the order that they will speak. Each person will speak for about like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I'll have some questions to pose them. Afterwards, we'll open it up, and the panelists ideally will converse with each other, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So the first panelist is Dr. Ohannes Kılıçdağı, who has a double majored BA degree from Istanbul's Boğaziçi University, both in sociology and political science. Between 2017 and 19, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University. He published articles about the Ottoman Turkish Armenian community, and he has been a columnist in the Agos newspaper in Istanbul. That's Hrant Dink newspaper that we'll likely talk about. Currently, Dr. Kılıçdağı is joining us from Chicago, where he is serving as the Dumanyan visiting professor at the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at the University of Chicago. Then we will have Dr. Christopher Sheklian, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Radboud University in the Netherlands as a part of Rewriting Global Orthodoxy project in the Faculty of Philosophy, Theology, and Religion. Dr. Sheklian received his PhD in anthropology from the University of Chicago in 2017 with his dissertation titled Theology and the Community: The Armenian Minority, Tradition, and Secularism in Turkey. Afterwards, for 2 years, Dr. Sheklian served as the director of the Krikoran Clara Zohrab Information Center at the Eastern Diocese of the Armenian Church of America in New York. He has published on a number of topics, specifically on liturgy and law in the lives of religious minorities, including an article titled Promises of Property, Religious Foundations and the Justice and Development Party's Ambiguous Attitudes Towards Religious Minorities in the Journal of Turkish Studies. Christopher is currently working on a monograph entitled Liturgical Rites, Armenian Christian Presence in the Republic of Turkey. And the last panelist is Dr. Hrag Papasyan, who is also an anthropologist. His degree is from the University of Oxford. His dissertation was titled Contesting Armenianness, Plurality, Segregation, and Multilateral Boundary Making Among Armenians in Contemporary Turkey, which received the David Parkin Prize for the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography at Oxford, and an honorary mention in the Society for Armenian Studies Distinguished Dissertation Award competition. Currently, he is a Promise Armenian Institute postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Anthropology at UCLA, and he's working on a book manuscript, which will be most likely based on his dissertation topic. He previously taught at the American University of Armenia and was a visiting scholar in the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge. So I would like to give the floor now to Ohannes, my friend Ohannes, for his comments.
Okay, thank you, Lerna. And first of all, let me thank also ARPA Institute for putting this together and giving us the chance to have this conversation, I'm sure which will be great. Today, I will talk about a certain aspect of Turkish minority policy. Basically speaking, the minority policy of Turkish state has been based on to contain these communities or to limit their space, and I used space in political and social sense. And the state has applied this policy in different domains at different levels. Today, I'm going to look at some which I can call legal institutional aspect of this minority policy. And I will be doing this on focusing basically very and briefly three institutions. First, Patriarchate, the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul. Later, foundations, which is called vakıf in Turkish. And lastly, I will touch upon schools, Armenian community schools. First of all, as I say, let me focus on Patriarchate, the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul or Constantinople. In Ottoman times, this Patriarchate happened to be, which I can say, a part of Ottoman bureaucracy. I cannot go into details of this system because of time limits, as you know, but let me say that, as most of you know, Armenian Patriarchate and Patriarch in Ottoman times, not only late Ottoman times, but including which is called the classical times, although the conditions, authority, etc. changing, we can easily say that Ottoman Patriarchate, Armenian Patriarchate was clearly a part of Ottoman government, Ottoman bureaucracy in a way, direct or indirect. As I said, we cannot go into details. Coming to Turkish Republic time, let's say Republican times, we see that Armenian Patriarchate has had an ambivalent status or situation during the Republican time, because, on the one hand, on the, if you like, the legal domain, there is no such institution in Turkey because there is no law, bylaw, regulation, or any legal document defining this institution, defining its rights and responsibilities, the limits of its authority, etc. So legally, there is no such an institution. In other words, Armenian Patriarchate does not have a corporate identity, corporate body in Turkey. But on the other hand, when you look at the actuality of events, you will see that the state has recognized, de facto recognized, Armenian Patriarch and Patriarchate as the representative of Armenian community, as they accept him as representative, having meetings with him to discuss the communal problems, inviting him to official ceremonies on different occasions, etc., etc. They accepting petitions from his hand as the representative of community. So, as I say, de facto and de jure situation of position of Armenian Patriarchate reflect a discrepancy, a gap, okay? And, you know, although there has been repetitious demand from the Patriarchate, from the Armenian community to define Armenian Patriarchate and to bestow a legal identity, a corporate body to the Patriarchate, but Turkish state has not responded to these demands and leave this situation ambivalent, which I would say on purpose. And at the end of my talk, I say why it's on purpose, I think. Coming to the second bunch of institutions, which I say as foundations or vakıflar in Turkish. You know, Ottoman Armenian community life, especially in cities, was shaped around certain institutions like churches, schools, cemeteries, orphanages, hospitals, and in more rural areas, monasteries, etc. And all these institutions, just I list or just I count, were established by Sultan's order, which in, again, Turkish, irade, royal, if you like, ordinances. And by the same way, they got possessions, they got properties, again, by the permission of basically state, or if you like, administration of the time. And, you know, this means that they didn't have a certain characteristics that, legally speaking, that a foundation should have. And, you know, again, as a part of communal life, the boards that rules or that governs these institutions and properties, you know, were elected by popular vote by, again, Armenian people. So after the, again, establishment of republic, Turkish state needed to define, legally define these institutions, and they decided to define them as foundations, vakıfs. In 1926, when they promulgated new civil law, they also categorized these Armenian institutions under the category of, as I say, foundations. However, these foundations or these institutions, I say this totality of schools, churches, whatever, you can add the list, indeed were not foundations, or some of their characteristics, their real identity does not comply with being foundation. First of all, you know, in Ottoman law system, let's say, every foundation should have had a document called, in Turkish, vakfiye, which we can translate, I think, as a charter, in which each foundation should mention its aims and the list of its properties. Most of these Armenian institutions does not have this document because, as I say, they were not originally established as foundations, okay? Secondly, and by the way, let me add this, you know, in following decades, the state punished those foundations because of they did not have this document called vakfiye or charter, okay? Please keep this in your mind because it's critical. But let me continue with the second characteristic of foundations. You know, legally speaking, foundations are associations of properties allocated to a certain philanthropic purposes, okay? So in law, in Ottoman law, foundation, vakıf, is a bunch of properties indeed. However, these institutions, these Armenian institutions, as you know, were and still are much beyond of being an association of properties. As I said, communal life, social life, at a certain extent, political life of Armenians has been shaped around these institutions. In other words, these institutions are living, vivid spheres of social activity rather than being just a bunch of properties. So what you see here again is the discrepancy or gap between the actual identity, actual characteristics of foundations or those institutions, and legal identity or legal definition that was given to them. You know, which is exactly true for schools. You know, when I mean, as for schools, there was also a discrepancy, a gap between their actual status and actual characteristics and legal status. You know, indeed, schools, Armenian schools, work as a part of or as an organ of foundations. But besides this, they have also an additional legal, let's say, identity, which is defined in the law for private educational institutions, meaning that these schools are defined as private initiatives. Why is it important? Because this means that legally the state perceives or positions these schools as private initiatives established by individuals or entrepreneurs for the sake of having profit, for the sake of making profit, okay? And when you define these institutions in this way, of course, they want to tax these schools accordingly, as if they were private firms, educational initiatives, over which someone is making profit. And of course, they try to tax. I mean, the state wants to tax this profit. However, when you look at the actual situation, you will see that these schools are not private initiatives established for the sake of profit, but basically these are communal schools. And you know, these schools do not charge a fixed fee their students. I mean, they do not receive a fixed amount of money, in other words, from each student. You know, basically, every family pays as much as they can. And, you know, even some families, some students do not pay anything, okay, for the school. And, you know, even in most of the cases, the cost of, let's say, transportation or food were on school's budget. So to cut the long story short, leaving aside making profit, most of these schools have annual and chronic, I would say, budget deficits. Okay, so this budget deficits, or let's say financial difficulties, of course, constitutes a constant pressure on schools, and most of the schools, I would say, they try to cover or try to compensate these annual chronic budget deficits through donations from community and through donations from other foundations, which are comparatively speaking in a better situations. Additionally, these schools are expected to meet the physical standards of private schools, meaning that, you know, whenever someone, an entrepreneur, as I said, opens a private educational institution, of course, he or she has to meet some requirements in terms of physical standards of the building. In other words, they expect to have a modern building with modern facilities, with modern, let's say, possibilities. However, the problem is that most of the buildings of Armenian community schools were built in 19th century. And practically speaking, it was impossible for them to meet these physical standards. Okay, it's physically impossible. Nowadays, I mean, it's written on the law, and they, on the paper, theoretically speaking, Armenian schools have to meet these standards. But practically speaking, on the other hand, Turkish officials, bureaucrats, I would say, overlook this situation. In other words, they turn their heads away in this issue. But let me say that, of course, it remains as a threat, as a potential threat, as a potential risk. Because, you know, if tomorrow any bureaucrat, any official decides to apply the law, these schools may face the risk of just closure, okay? Because it's written, practically speaking, it's written in the law. If you do not, or if you cannot meet these standards, the state may close down your building. So again, this is another risk, okay, caused by the difference between their actual status and legal identity. So I'm sure you already noticed a general pattern about which 2 points may be highlighted. First, we may say that a deliberate legal vacuum pertaining to Armenian institutions has been created by the state. And second, whenever they were given a legal status to these institutions, there happened to be a gap or discrepancy between their legal status and actual identity and functions. You know, by creating this legal vacuum, Turkish state, you know, does not tie its hands with any legal obligation. For example, in the case of Armenian Patriarchy, okay? Meaning that they may behave, they may act however they want, and they don't have to be consistent in this because there is no law to follow them, okay? So, you know, you see, there is a free hand for them or a free space in which they can maneuver however they want, as there is no law limiting their actions, okay? In other words, this legal vacuum, if you like, creates a space in which the state can act freely according to changing circumstances. Similarly, when they allocate inconsistent legal status to Armenian institutions with their actual and identity and function, you know, practically speaking, they stripped off, you know, some rights from them. Consider the schools. I mean, if you define these schools, Armenian schools, as, for example, as public institutions, public educational institutions, then you have to allocate a certain budget from a certain financial support from public budget, be it local or central. So to cut the long story short, in a very simple conclusion, we can say that here what we see is that the law has been weaponized by Turkish state to contain the Armenian community or to restrict their possibilities and restrict their social and economic developments. Okay, this is the basic, I think, background, basic situation in terms of legal institutional, let's say, domain. Let me stop here. We can, you know, indeed, it's a very complicated issue with all these laws, etc. But let me stop here, not to take the other participants' time. We can elaborate on this issue, if you like, Q&A section. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ohannes. I'll have some questions, but I guess I'm going to connect my questions to the others' questions, but as you might be expecting, I'll ask you to dig a little deeper. I mean, no, just like, what's the role of Lausanne Treaty because I have been recently working more closely about the treaty. I would like you to kind of reflect with us on it. Okay, the second speaker is Dr. Sheklian. Chris, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lerna. Thank you to Hog Open to ARPA for the invitation, Lerna for your moderating, and Ohanas and Herag. This is a wonderful, thrilling opportunity to have a conversation with a number of people here that I consider to be, the absolute experts on what I am interested in and what I work on. So it's very exciting. And Ohanas, thank you. I think you've teed me up perfectly. What I am going to kind of work with, I'm going to be thinking about some of these same institutions, and what I'm going to do is try to take some of them on from the lens of secularism. So why secularism, right? At the emergence of the contemporary Republic of Turkey, a kind of official understanding of history, which is often called Kemalist after Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the first president. This official history kind of takes root, and central to this Kemalist understanding of history is the idea of a very deep and profound rupture with the Ottoman past. Right, the Republic of Turkey is new, it's different, it's going to not be the Ottoman past. One of the ways that Kemalism claimed to be a break from the Ottoman past was in its secular character. Okay, the modern Republic of Turkey is this secular republic. This is in distinction to the religious Ottoman past. This is the sort of self-understanding that the early Turkish historiography, ideas of history, put forward, right? And in fact, secularism, or in Turkish layıklık, coming from the French laïcité, was enshrined as what is often called one of the 6 arrows of Kemalist ideology. So this idea of secularism is put front and center as to what makes the Republic of Turkey distinctive, and it's part of how the argument goes that the Republic of Turkey is different, that there's a break from this past, right? On the other hand, later historians have taken secularism, layıklık, as simply being, the culmination of a long series of reforms that started much earlier in the Ottoman Empire. So in a sense, these later historians said, no, this Kemalist idea of a strong break, that's nonsense. In fact, actually, secularism is something that developed slowly through the Ottoman period, and Ataturk maybe put it more directly into the laws of the modern republic, but it's not a sort of fundamental break. So you can see actually that this question and this debate over secularism gets right at the heart of the framing question of this panel, right? Has anything changed? Well, actually, the way that we think about secularism, these arguments over what it is and its relationship to the Ottoman Empire and to the Republic of Turkey, get right at the heart of the question of rupture or continuity, is the way that I would think about this. And not, whether or not something has changed, fine. Rupture or continuity, right, is how I would think about this. So in what follows, I'm going to begin by giving a little bit of sense of what do I mean by secularism and what has been meant by secularism in Turkey. Those things are quite different, the way that I will use it. And then I'm going to look at actually a couple of these institutions that Ohanas has introduced us to through the lens of secularism, to sort of see how these institutions, in fact, I won't say they make more sense, but we can see the conundrums that have already been introduced through the lens of secularism a little bit. So first off, what do I mean by secularism? Well, first and foremost, I'll say what I don't really mean, which is that there's an idea of secularism as simply the separation between, church and state, we say in America, or we can say more broadly, religion and politics. Some people even like to say, politics in the mosque or something like that. The other big way of thinking about secularism is that it's simply the sort of leaving behind of religion, right? So often if you speak, say, with a priest and they say, oh, I'm, secularism is bad, that understanding of secularism is simply that religion has been left behind, right? There's a slow removal of the importance of religion in everyday life. And we can debate that. Sociologists will debate this. Has there been a decline of religion? Well, there are fewer people going to church in America. Clearly, there's a decline of religion. I'm going to leave these ideas a little bit to the side. And I'm going to try not to get too technical here. But from my perspective, when I am thinking about secularism, I largely follow a very important scholar, an anthropologist named Talal Asad, who's given us some ways of thinking about secularism. And for him, it's not just an opposition between the secular and the religious that marks this, but it's in fact that the idea of religion and politics are sort of categories have shifted, and we're in a kind of new place when it comes to secularism and to thinking about the secular. What does this mean? I like to use the example of thinking sort of from medieval European history, right? We would say, aha, there were a bunch of different religions, right? There were the Catholics, and then the Protestants came around, and there were Muslims. These are different religions. The thing is that this is not how people conceived the world at the time, in fact, right? From the perspective, let's take the perspective of the Catholic Church. There was the, one and holy true Catholic faith, i.e. the Church of Rome. Then there were, schismatics, like say the Byzantines, heretics, probably the Armenian Church would have been heretics, infidels, pagans, but none of these were seen as equal religions. The idea that the Pope would see, Muslims and Armenian Christians as all being equally the same thing, religion, is not quite right. It's not how people were sort of seeing the world. So from an Assadian perspective, what happens is that we have totally new ways of thinking about these categories. What is religion? Religion emerges as something that we can identify. And crucially, religion is separate not only from politics, but it's also separate from ethnicity, from ethno-national identity. So under a sort of secular understanding of the world, religion ought to be separate from ethnicity and from nationality. Now, everything we know about Armenians should immediately make us realize that this is going to be deeply hard, difficult, problematic, and does not work for Armenians. Specifically, Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, this is not how they were arranged at all. The idea that one could, say, be an Armenian without being a member of the Armenian Apostolic Church, legally speaking, was not even possible until the 19th century. If you were recognized legally as an Armenian, you were you were connected to the Armenian Apostolic Church in what has been called the millet system. I will not go into the details of that. That is a can of worms. But in the 19th century, there emerged an Armenian Protestant and an Armenian Catholic millet. So there was an understanding that one could be Armenian while still having other religious identities. So this is precisely a sort of recognition that something has changed, right? Something has stuck a wedge between religion and ethnicity. And once this possibility emerges, then laws, all kinds of organizational things begin to take root around this idea. So when we say maybe that the secular character of the Republic of Turkey is foundational to it, on the one hand, sure, it means certain specific legal things, but it also means this entire sort of character, that the possibility of a kind of difference between religion and ethnicity and religion and nationality is possible. So if this is possible, great, that sounds fine. But let's think with the Armenians and with these institutions actually that Ohanes has introduced us to. And we can see that in the cases of these institutions, the idea that this should be able easily to be separated, right? That you can separate ethnicity and religion, it doesn't work with many of these institutions. The Vakifs, I think, these foundations are a primary example of this. Because if you look at the Vakif, as Ohannes has described it very, very wonderfully and adequately, it's often a conglomeration of things. On the one hand, you have the properties that are revenue generating for a charitable purpose. Well, what is that charitable purpose? Often it's a church, often it's an orphanage. But as Ohannes said, with the schools and the churches, in many cases, the Vakif bundles a whole bunch of things together. Often the most common actually being the church and the school. They're on the same grounds. They are part of the same legal entity. Their administration works through the same board, is sort of in charge. There are obviously different aspects of daily life. There's a priest, there's a principal, etc. But the overall board is taking care of sort of managing the properties, the finances of a Vakif that bundles together something that from a secular perspective shouldn't really go together. What is a minority ethnic school and the church? Why are those things bundled together? So what I want to kind of suggest here, thinking through these problems from the perspective of secularism, is that there are really specific conundrums that Armenians, and we can say other religious minorities, and this will get at Lerna's question about Lucerne, actually, right? Those minorities who have been given certain status based off of religious difference, then encounter the laws of the Republic of Turkey that are grounded in a more secular system, except for the fact that it doesn't work always for the Armenians. So you end up with these really odd paradoxes, right? Where on the one hand, we are in a legal situation where it ought to be such that religion and ethnicity are separate. It ought to be such that a purely abstract Turkish citizen, regardless of their religion, approaches the Turkish state as a citizen. That's what it ought to be. That's what this sort of, legal secular ideal says is how they should be treated. But in reality, in part because of the legacy of the Treaty of Lausanne, there are certain institutions and certain categories that have persisted, so that you have one set of legal things that continue to emphasize the religious character and nature of Armenians in the Republic of Turkey. And on the other hand, you have a set of legal institutions that are, stemming from civil law, that are stemming from this, purported character, secular character of the Turkish state, that says that this religious difference is not the difference that should matter. And then you have these institutions like the Vakifs, like the Patriarchate, that have sort of been, continued across the divide from the Ottoman to the Republican period, that don't have this division in them. So you have, on the one hand, you have laws that want religion and ethnicity to be separate. You have legal categories grounded in the Treaty of Lausanne that explicitly mark out religious difference. And you have institutions that have continued across the Ottoman Republican divide that in no way adhere to this division between religion and ethnicity. Again, a Vakif bundles all kinds of things together, that some we would look at and see as religious, and others we would see as being ethnic or being secular. School should just be secular, right? And so when we come at it from this perspective of secularism, I think we can begin to see what some of these conundrums are. Because, for instance, one of the ways that one is admitted to an Armenian school, you have to be Armenian. How do you prove that you're Armenian? One of the most common ways to prove that you are Armenian for admission to the Armenian school is to show a certificate of baptism in one of the recognized Armenian denominations. So we can see actually that we get these weird conundrums. We get these weird things where, in order to work through multiple layers and sets of legal regimes, you have to do things that don't make a whole lot of sense. And I think, I'm looking forward to the conversation with Ohannes, because I think that this is one of the specific ways that these ambiguities play out. the ambiguities that he's talking about, I think are one of the key ones, maybe we can say, has to do with the tension between a secular character of some of the laws and the completely, we might even say asecular nature of many of the institutions. And by that, I mean asecular, not non-secular, not religious, but simply that they're not interested in making this division between, say, nation, and religion, ethnicity and religion, secular and religious. The Vakıf is an institution that doesn't care about that division, but a lot of the laws do. And this is where I think a lot of the ambiguities and problems for Armenians in the contemporary Republic of Turkey arise. And I'm looking forward now also to Hrag, because I know that he is going to bring in some populations that mess with this even more. So I think I will leave it at that.
Great. Yes, I think things are combining very well, somewhat in an improvisational manner. This is great. Thank you, Chris. These weird conundrums, I've really spent so much time trying to unpack them and find a way of making sense of them. I kind of felt I just labeled things, but like secular method or Republic of Paradox. But it's so nice to see that we are moving on in the historiography where you're bringing more of the secularism perspective. Okay, so next panelist is Dr. Papasyan. Hrag, please.
Thank you, Lerna. And thank you, first of all, for having me here. Thanks to the ARPA Institute, Dr. Papazian. And thanks to my colleagues that are also joining. It's really, as Chris said, it's really good to be with other people working more or less, basically the same geography, the same context, even if from different perspectives. And speaking of different perspectives, my perspective, as also Chris said, is going to be a bit different. Do you see? I'm sharing my screen. Does it appear? Do you see it? Okay. So I am going to speak about Turkey's another type of Armenians, or another category of Armenians in Turkey. I chose to speak to dedicate this short talk, this short presentation to this population, though I also research the Christian Armenians, the traditional Armenian community in Istanbul, also the migrants arriving from Armenia recently. But I am going to discuss what is often termed as, that's the discussion that I'm going to have. They are called in different names: Islamized Armenians, Muslim Armenians, Hamshenahais, hidden Armenians, crypto-Armenians. There's this plethora of terms and categories and words. That's going to be at the heart of my discussion today. I chose this because realizing, first of all, that most, if not all attendees would be Armenian, and because when I speak usually during the last years, I tell Armenians specifically that my research also covers this group, not the traditional Armenians. The first question that comes is, how many are they? This is the question that interests many Armenians. And in fact, this is a topic that has become part of the global Armenian discourse beyond the frames, beyond the boundaries of Turkey. And so I am guessing that, first of all, these questions will also interest people watching this later or being here, who are here now. But also I want to use this opportunity to make some, I would dare to say, clarifications or indications about some problematic uses of terms, categories that are ascribed to these people. So when they ask me how many are they, my first response comes as a question: who exactly? And then I hear different answers. Some say Islamized Armenians, others say hidden Armenians, others say crypto-Armenians, others say Muslim Armenians. And so I want to basically deconstruct these terms, dissect them, rather than really speaking about the people today, though there's a lot to say about that, and I'm happy to expand on that as well So their experiences, what they have gone through, where do they stand in terms of the legal institutional limitations and definitions of Armenianness, about which the previous speaker spoke. But I will focus mostly on these terms and on the discourse surrounding them, because I think that discourse is also has also made its way into the Armenian, as I said, the global Armenian, public media, but also in conversations that I often hear. So first of all, Islamized Armenians. This is one of the mostly used terms. Now, who are the Islamized Armenians? This is a term that is like the other terms, and basically, like in many terms and many categories in social sciences, it gets to a point that they start losing their initial meaning, and they start to be applied very widely and wildly, and to the extent of losing their or presenting an empirical inaccuracy. So initially, when these discussions were sparked in Turkey, starting from the late 1990s, especially at the turn of the century, first of all, people started to speak about Armenians who were Islamized, who were converted mostly by force during the genocide, or during previous massacres, during the Hamidian massacres, for instance. And then there were also talks about the Islamization of Armenians in historical Hamshen much earlier, and so on. So it was situated in a historical perspective, in a historical context. And so people started speaking, writing, presenting, even putting together a conference in Istanbul about the Islamized Armenians, looking at these Armenians in 1915 or slightly earlier or later, who got Islamized. So if we're looking at it from that perspective, it's not that problematic, except if we go into the detail, except the fact that what does Islamized Armenian mean, in the sense that how much Armenian are these people after becoming Islamized? That is the sense that how much of their Armenianness they were allowed to retain, and whether they were, so whether they are, whether it is correct to call them Islamized Armenians, or it would be better to call them Armenians. Well, Armenians who got Islamized. And then what happened next, it's really problematic, because it really depends on which specific people are we talking about. We're talking about the orphans, for instance, who were 4-year-old, and then they got Islamized, and then adopted into Muslim families, and most of them even lost any memory or any consciousness about their Armenian past. So this is one thing. But what concerns me specifically is when this term is brought to current discussions and to the current population, and people who currently live as Muslims, either legally or also by faith, but come out as Armenians or claim to be Armenian or identify as Armenian, they are also often spoken about also mostly in different circles, both in English, but also in Armenian, Islamized, and so on, using this word, Islamized Armenians. So one example I brought here is this YouTube video screenshot I took, and I encircled there. It says, Islamized hidden, there's also the word hidden there. So Islamized hidden Armenians at the Armenian Genocide Monument. Now, most of these people here at the Armenian Genocide Monument in 2015 are not people who got Islamized themselves, are people who are descendants of Armenians who were Islamized. So these people are born within the Muslim category legally. Many of them are also born in Muslim cultures, in Islamic cultures. Some of them are also, not necessarily these particular, every single one of them, but some of them also might be devout Muslims. So this is one problem. I bring here an excerpt from an article, and this also, it's concerning because this also makes its way into some academic articles as well. This is an originally Armenian published article by an Armenian academic. And so the first time he uses the term, there's a footnote by the editor that says the term Islamized Armenians is used by the author to mention those Armenians who were forcibly converted to Islam in the Ottoman Empire and the Republic of Turkey. Fine. But then the same author, a few pages later, he speaks about his last year's visit to Mush and Van, where he says many crypto, I'll come to that term in a second, and also Islamized Armenians showed us that book that had enabled them, the book in Armenian of Armenian language, basically, that had enabled them to learn their native tongue and so on and so on. So again, he speaks, so he takes that term and then he applies it to people who are currently living as Muslim Armenians in Turkey. And there is an anachronism that comes out of all of this. So this is one point I like to make. So most of the people currently living are not people who got Islamized, are not Armenians who are themselves Islamized. As I said, they are born into families whose ancestors were Islamized. There are very few exceptions. Some of them are very old people, not necessarily born in 1915, because Islamization continued later during the Republican years as well. There have been tribes, families, clans of Armenians who remained in historical Armenia, in Western Armenia, in Eastern Turkey, however one wants to call it, after the genocide, and then were converted in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s in some cases. So there could be such cases. And then there are some very exceptional cases. One of them I pictured here with me in 2016. This is a woman who is an Islamized Armenian, in the sense that she is a woman who used to attend those very institutions about which Ohannes and Chris spoke. She was born a Christian Armenian. She grew up, she was also quite active in the Armenian church. And then at a certain point in her life, she got into Sufism and she got converted to Islam. So such cases also occurred, but this is really exceptional. It's not this, when we speak about this population, it's not mostly this kind of people we are speaking about. I just wanted to bring it as an example to put it in contrast with the others who do not really fit this word. That is problematic because it's anachronistic oftentimes, but also can get problematic even when we speak about the history, because as I said, that do they remain Armenian? To what extent they remain socially Armenian or not? So let me move to the second term, and I'm going to come back to this slide because there is this somewhat secret here. Crypto-Armenians, hidden Armenians, secret Armenians. This is another very often used term. Hidden Armenians. In Armenian, takun hayır. In Turkish, gizli Ermeniler, crypto-Ermeniler. This is also very problematic. It's very problematic first because it's empirically and analytically problematic. It has lots of complications. And then it's also problematic in terms of its political, also ethical connotations, which I want to touch upon. It's empirically and analytically complicated and very messy, I would say, because there are several questions. First, who is the hidden Armenian? If we go back to this previous slide, these people are hidden Armenians who have come to the Armenian Genocide Museum. If they have come to the Armenian Genocide Museum as Armenians, how much hidden they are. Similarly, the author here, whom I quoted, he says they showed us the Armenian language book. They are learning Armenian, and they show that with great inspiration and somewhat in secret. How are they showing that in secret? It rather, this discourse rather builds into a fascination about this seemingly secret nation living or that has stayed behind and that is still living there. And it prompts people like this Armenian author to further construct that, or that mythicized image of the somewhat secret Armenians. So this is one thing. I'm not claiming that there are no Armenians, there are no legally Muslim Armenians who maintain their Armenian memory, their Armenian sense, their Armenian perhaps subjectivity by hiding it from some other people. But again, it's important not to take that term and then apply to everyone we see that falls in this very broad and very diverse category. Second, if they are hiding from whom? Hidden from whom? Are they hidden from the state? Well, in fact, that is not the case, because many of them in reality, well, because the state has kept registries, and this is historically now proven by some historians, including Taner Akçam, who has found or spoken about how during the conversion process, during the genocide process, converted people were registered, they became part of the general governance of Armenians and of Armenianness. And then this continued in the Republican period as well. And many of the people I met and I spoke to have faced this when dealing with state employees or state, people from within the state apparatus. The fact that the state actually knows that their ancestors were Armenians. Even some people, it's not that they have hidden their Armenianness. In fact, their Armenianness has been hidden from them by the state and eventually exposed to them again by the state. So I heard personally several cases in which people learned about having Armenian origins when applying to the Armenian to the Turkish military, to the Turkish military school, or with the aim or with the goal of becoming a general or a colonel or something, and they were rejected. Their applications were rejected, and the only explanation they were given was that genlerinde Ermenilik var, meaning that there is Armenianness in your genes. So again, if hidden from whom? Hidden from if not the state, from your neighborhood, from your neighbors. If we're not speaking about the large cities like Ankara, Izmir, and Istanbul, this is also often not the case, because these Armenian families, these families who are descendants of Islamized Armenians, oftentimes are known to be originally Armenian by their very non-Armenian Muslim neighbors, Kurds, Arabs, and they are still discriminated against because of their Armenian origins. And finally, a third complication when it comes to the analytical usages or the analytical veracity or validity or helpfulness of the term is they are hidden in contrast to whom? To the non-hidden Armenians. So if we're speaking about hidden Armenians, there are also non-hidden Armenians. And the non-hidden Armenians should be, in this case, understood to be the Christian Armenians. Now, if we're speaking about hiding your Armenianness, so you're not hiding it from the state because the state knows it, you're not hiding it from your immediate neighborhood because they know you are the Gavur Ermeni, so the son of the Gavur, or the progeny of the Gavur, then okay, you can hide it easily if you go to Ankara or if you go to another neighborhood. Your name is Mehmet Ahmet. Yeah, that's true. But in fact, if we look at them closely, Christian Armenians as well, because of the very difficult conditions in the Republic of Turkey, they also face the situation in many cases that they also have to hide their Armenianness from non-Armenians. Their names might not be are not Ahmed and Mehmet, but they can either be non-Islamic but still Turkish names like John and Jem, or they can be names that are not necessarily non-Armenian but sound like also Turkish, or could be interpreted or could pass as non-Armenian. And then finally, and I'll wrap it up, there are the problem. What bothers me personally, perhaps to a larger extent, is that these terms have problematic connotations, and where they come from and how they are used. And I think we should also take this into consideration when we decide whether we want to use that term and we want to basically participate in its construction or not. In the Turkish discourse and in the Armenian discourse, this crypto-Armenian discourse has its meanings that goes beyond the analytical, beyond the empirical, beyond just the categorization, just an apolitical categorization. It gets politicized. In the Turkish case, it's spoken as gizli Ermeniler and crypto-Ermeniler. And this is, there's a whole conspiracy in public media, very often spoken of, but also spoken about by some politicians, basically labeling any political opponent as originally Armenian, as gizli Ermeni, as a hidden Armenian, as a crypto-Armenian, including whole movements like the PKK movement, the Kurdish guerrilla movement, even its leaders Abdullah Öcalan pictured here in the second picture, who is alleged to have an old Armenian name, Artin Agopian. I've tried to dig into this. I found not any single, of course, no proof, but not anything that looks like any proof either. And there's this whole, conspiracy. You can see in the picture, it's written, those Armenians who are said to have died in 1915, they still live in Turkey under the name of Kürt. So all Kurds basically fighting against the repressive fascist regime in Turkey are in fact, or are pictured as being these crypto-Armenians, these secret Armenians. On the left, you see the shocking allegation. This is taken a screenshot from media. FETÖ is Armenian. FETÖ is the movement by Fethullah Gülen, who has allegedly organized the coup d'etat attempt in 2016. And after the coup d'etat attempt, there were these theories that resurfaced about Gülen himself being in reality a crypto-Armenian. His paternals, grandparents were Pakradunis, and Pakradunis are not just Armenians, but also Jews, and so on and so on. And finally, there's this book, Ermeni Evlat Leklar, which is one of the most cited books. It's written by a Turkish journalist. It's one of the most cited ones, and it has a whole. And I have a picture here. 3. bölüm. The third part of it is a whole part of it is titled "The Secret Armenians, Gizli Ermeniler Terör Örgütlerinde." So the secret Armenians in terrorist organizations. So there's this conspiratorial plotting, and the discourse on crypto-Armenians feeds that discourse, if it's not originally produced for the purpose of that discourse. But then this finds its way, and I'll finish here, this finds also its way into the Armenian discourse as Zbdial Hayers, Kakhni Takun Hayers, and from a quite mirroring but different perspective. Again, this will or image or wish of seeing millions of secret Armenians still living in our ancestral lands, that they will come up one day and they will join and they will help us rebuild the nation, and so on and so on. It's problematic not because it plays with these numbers and it wants to see millions of Armenians there because their origins are Armenians, but it also ascribes Armenianness to people who actually do not claim to be Armenian. I realize I don't have time. If I can, I will show it later during the Q&A. I have a video here in which someone is talking to a Hemshin Armenian. The Hemshin Armenian person himself, in Armenian, which you will understand, is saying Homshetsim, Hai Chim, meaning I'm a Hemshinli, I'm not an Armenian, Hai Chim. And then the Armenian TV that has made this documentary presents him as a Hamshena Hai. Right, so there's this problem as well, and the same author whom I cited previously. There's another quotation from him. He speaks of these Takun Hayer as and about them saying some locally maintained national identity, or at least its memory, which in case of a favorable situation can theoretically become a basis for their improved organization. You actually see in an academic article some political tendencies or wishes that surround this general image and discourse of millions of hidden Armenians that are there and that are waking up and that are going to come out soon. A final example is this book by an Armenian journalist, Hajian. The subtitle is The Hidden Armenians of Turkey. The title is Secret Nation, which again is very problematic because how can a nation be secret, first of all, if a nation is this imagined community with links with each other, right? But then there are very, it's a very good book in terms of what it has done, going to these people and talking, bringing their histories out, their stories out ethnographically. But there are some cases, for instance, this Voskedzar Armenians, he speaks about. And he speaks about going to this old couple and talking to them. And these people insist to him that we used to be Armenian, but we became Muslim, and so we are no longer Armenian. But he still calls them Voskedzar Armenians, changing not just the name of the current name of the village, which originally used to be called Voskedzar, but also their self-identification, because he wants to believe that they are secretly Armenian, but they're just not telling him, which is not often the case. If I have 1 minute, Lerna, Yeah, alternatives, well, the general approach should be not to fall into the trap of taking one large category and then applying it on everyone. So there are different cases, different names, different words that could be used analytically or empirically correctly, depending on who we are talking about. So Islamized Armenians is valid if you are talking about that history, keeping in mind that problematic assumption that are they still Armenians in the sense of being socially permitted to be Armenian or not? Descendants of Islamized Armenians are descendants of those people who were Armenians who in their own lives, during their own lives, became Muslim, got converted. But then who are the descendants of Islamized Armenians? Are descendants of Islamized Armenians Armenians? That's a broad question, and the answer is definitely not all of them. Muslim Armenians is a term that I use when I speak about Armenians who are either legally in their documents or also religiously Muslim, but claim to be Armenian. So they call themselves Müslüman Ermeni. I am both Muslim and Armenian. Unlike the Voskedar Armenians who say, no, we're just Muslim, we've left Armenianness aside because they have an ethno-religious understanding of identities generally. But one thing to mention there is that Muslim Armenians should not also be a term that covers that covers all of them, because also there are the Alevi Armenians who are legally, and we go back to Lausanne here, and I'll end here, who are legally considered Muslim, but they themselves often, it's I think about 15 to 20% of Turkey's population. Many of them are not really comfortable to identify as Muslims, especially those in Dersim, for instance, where we have many Alevi Armenians who have, children or descendants of Armenians who got Alevized after the 1930s increasingly. And this is one picture that I took in the home of one of them. She's, I can tell her about her later, but I realize I'm beyond the limits of, beyond the time limit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hope I made sense.
Yes, no, it did. It's very thought stimulating. I'm so glad you did this work of parsing out the ways in which people think about them, write about them, as well as what is problematic about each one of them. So it's not just a picture of the field as it is, but also it's an intervention, really, truly, that I appreciate. Maybe I'll start. I know people on the chat, they have written some questions. I have 2 questions. What's that? I will also ask you to comment on each other if you have any thoughts. But
shall I give some question, Lerna, if possible?
What's that?
From Armenia. Shall I give some question to Hrag Papazyan? Is it possible?
Who is speaking?
Hello, you hearing me?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm gonna finish my comments first, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Just give me a few minutes, okay?
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so about Hrag, this army is, I can't even fully express myself, but just saying that even during the genocide, these people, like say 2 years after the genocide, these people are Islamized Armenians, is still, in my opinion, it's not necessarily always valid. So even that group of like descendants of Islamized Army, that category itself, you mentioned that like if you're a 4-year-old and by the time that you're 10, you don't even remember that you used to be Armenian, can we still talk about you as Armenian? But the general problem that I have, that I would like you to think with me here, is this idea of Islamized Armenians, because in my mind, they are also de-Armenianized. Like it kind of connects to, I think, Chris's idea as well, right? Like because in the Ottoman mind, in the Islamic law's mind, in the Turkish Republic's mind, in the Patriarch's mind, and in many of us, we also have that mind still, that if they are it's an oxymoron, right? Like you can be de-Armenianized by making you into a Muslim person. I mean, that is why they are converted, just so that they are not Armenian anymore, right? Because if they were continuing to be Armenians, they would have been massacred. The problem with Armenians, they have to be genocided because they can be Armenians. How do you unmake them as Armenians? You either massacre them, you kidnap them, or you kill them by turning them into Muslims. So I've always wondered, like, why we fell so easily as historiography, as people who work on this idea of keeping them as Armenian insistently, rather than saying that they are de-Armenianized Muslims, right? Because they didn't survive the genocide as Armenians, they died as Armenians. However, the fact that you're doing anthropological work with their descendants, if they are considering themselves as Armenian, then they are Armenian. Yeah, because they survived the genocide as individuals, but in the eye of the state. So this is when I'm going to move to Chris and Johannes. In the eye of the state, they are still, are they still, like, I want you to think about this, Chris, in the eye of the state, are they, in what ways are they still Armenian or not? Like, is it relevant still? For instance, for school, right? I think this is also with Johannes, we can enter. I think the school issue connects, in my mind, all three of your presentations, right? So in Turkey, in order to go to the Armenian school, you need to be an ethnically and religiously Armenian person, because as Chris mentioned, you cannot prove your Armenianness if you don't have baptism papers, and baptism papers will come from the Patriarchate, even though we also know that the state also keeps records of what number you are according to your category. So an Islamized Armenian, or whatever, what we call, no, let's call them Muslim Armenian, a Muslim Armenian, right? A person who identifies as Armenian, but also Muslim, but in her identity card has Muslim. I mean, legally, per Lausanne, she's not a minority.
Mm-hmm.
She cannot send her kid to the Armenian school. So then, can an Armenianness in Turkey, in Republican Turkey, can it be on the eye of the beholder, kind of like, do we give, I know, for instance, so this is something that Ateşyan, I think, like many patriarchs commented on this topic, because the Patriarchate has its own regimen of allowing transitions from Islam to Armenianness, right? Because so I'm not sure, but if an Muslim Armenian person wants to legally become Christian Armenian, then they have to go through a process that the Patriarchate has to approve, right? Mm-hmm. After which they can have baptism papers, but will the school still allow them? Do we have any cases of it, for instance? Yeah. Would be very interesting to hear. And on the other hand, we have people who are Armenians in Turkey, but they have never really fully converted, but their papers are showing them as Muslim. Many people from Malatya, Mersin, Adıyaman, we have them. So they have, and their kids were not allowed to go to the Armenian schools. Why? Even though the state knows that the fişlenmiş number is 2, but their religion doesn't fit to the Armenian. Right? So that's what
may I interrupt
you,
or because
yes, yeah.
I think we should clarify this issue of registration to schools. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let me give you a quick summary of the situation. Legally speaking, although it's not a requirement by Lausanne Treaty, laws published later by the Republic, you have to belong to Armenian community in order to be enrolled at Armenian schools. Until 2008 or so, Armenian parents had to take some certificates, permission certificates from the registry office that they can enroll or register their kids to Armenian schools. And later, as a kind of, let's say, as a way of scandal, it was understood that the state has been given secret codes to these Armenian, Greek, Armenian, and Jewish communities to follow their descendants, okay? So through these secret codes, which happen to be 2 for Armenians, the state was able to follow this lineage, if you like, and checking all these generations, they confirmed that that certain kid is an Armenian and can be enrolled to, let's say, to Armenian schools. You know, to cut the long story short, in 2008, this surfaced. It became a, let's say, a sort of scandal. Later, state left this application. First, they give the authority of permission to Turkish vice principals employed at Armenian schools, but later they completely left this decision to Armenian schools or Armenian principals of the schools. But after then, again, the question emerged because the law still is there. Only Armenians can be enrolled at these schools. Then how can it be proved? Okay. Now the principals, Armenian principals, have faced this problem. And I think, contrary to your, say, impression, the state itself does not expect to have a baptism certificate of baptism to be enrolled in schools. It's not a requirement demanded by the state. Okay,
but the Assyrian kids have been removed from Armenian schools because they don't.
Because it's not related to their Christianity or having baptism or not, because according to that understanding, Assyrians are not Armenians, so they cannot be enrolled in Assyrian schools. But the thing is that some principals, in order to take themselves, in, let's say, as an insurance, some principals, by their own initiative, have demanded or still demand baptism certificate. But state, because, you know, there are some court cases in which Turkish state does not accept necessarily baptism, certificate of baptism as a sign or as a proof of Armenians. So, but still, I would say that until today, it's still ambivalent. So principles has this ambivalent, or let's say doubts, because, you know, there are also other examples in which 1 or 2 principals went through official investigations because they enrolled some kids who were not supposedly Armenian. So again, there is, in this issue, there is an, let's say, ambiguity. But again, on the other hand, some principles even do not ask baptism certificate. They accept, if parents say that we are Armenians, they accept that they are Armenians and enroll the kid. The other complication, you know, or let's say not complication, but liberalization, I don't remember the exact date, but Turkish civil law changed at a certain date. Until that time, only paternal lineage, okay, had been accepted as a proof of Armenianness. But after this change, paternal or maternal lineage is enough to be accepted as Armenian and to be enrolled in these schools. Basically, this is the situation about the enrollment at schools. I don't know, should I continue it?
I'm going to say one thing. This is very interesting, because when we think about like what has changed, has anything changed about Armenians from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic of Turkey? That's one thing that clearly changed, because in the Ottoman Empire, all the Armenian schools were open to non-Armenian people. And we know that Muslim Turks and others, as well as Greeks and Jews, sometimes attended Armenian schools, and obviously Armenians attended other schools as well. So this is when secularization enters the picture, to be a vehicle of both discrimination but from the Armenian perspective, as a way of keeping identity, because it's very weird. Armenian school is one of the places that Armenians can be reproduced because there aren't that many Turks around, right? Other than the vice president and the teachers, when the population, your friends are mostly, exclusively Armenian, it's what you want if you are a threatened community, really, in Turkey. Yeah, so now
actually, there is a disagreement in Armenian community about this. Some people, some Armenians think, as you say, they say that we should close our schools to non-Armenians because it's a place to save and maintain our identity. Whereas another group says that Armenian schools should and can be open to non-Armenians, as long as you keep the curriculum. I mean, teaching Armenian language and Armenian literature to students, then everybody can join, they say. And by the way, older generations mention that they remember that they were non-Armenians, non-Christians, let's say, at Armenian schools until 1950s or 60s, I think, or maybe earlier. They said that there had been some Turkish, whatever, Muslim students at Armenian schools, but later, again, legally, as a stipulation of law, the state restricted this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can I just thank Ohanas? Thank you for throwing out those details, and it's super complicated, and I just want to be clear that I don't it wasn't that it was legal, but right, I think from my perspective, what remains key is that this is still, the baptism certificate is one, that it functions at all, right, is problematic from the sort of secular standard, and two, I think it's remarkable that it continues to be the sort of the easiest way that you do this, right? Why are these principals doing it? Because it's like, okay, that's good, now we're done, now I don't have to worry about it, right? The ambiguity is gone because this baptismal certificate is going to be seen as proof.
True.
But I really thank you for that, because this is, these things, Vakif things as well, you can get tied up in knots trying to figure out exactly when did what change. And so this was very clear. I appreciate that. I actually, Hrag, do you have examples of these? I know that you also work with the population of Armenians from the Republic of Armenia. So maybe you have the ability to answer us ethnographically about some of these most, fringe, other Armenians and the access to schools. Do you know of instances that these other populations have found ways to be admitted?
Yeah, thank you for all the questions. I'll try to answer several of them. I'll start from the latest, Chris. And this was also, I think, asked in, this came up also in Elena's comment. Many of them, so the method of being able to get into the Armenian schools is, or the safest method is actually getting baptized. And yes, there are such cases. The Adıyaman Armenians, for instance, that Lerna mentioned, and
he is from, my dad's side is Adıyamanlı. Yeah. I proudly announce, yes. And I know this story is very intimately. Some of them are technically Muslim.
So there is a quite large population, or relatively large population of Muslim Armenians in Adıyaman, and several of them, starting from the late 90s, or some clans. I use the word clan because they use the word ashiret because of the sociocultural setting in those areas in South Anatolia. Southeast Anatolia. Several of them have started actually, or at least I can speak of one single family, the children of whom have started to go to Istanbul, and then they got baptized there. and then they got enrolled into the Christian Armenian schools, staying there throughout the year and then returning to Adıyaman only in summer. So this is something that has happened that I have seen. So that is what's easily done. That is what is legally acceptable. But coming back to these legal problems, it is very ambiguous, and it brings back to the questions that Ohannes raised about this ambiguous, legal ambiguities and dualities. And it brings me back to what Lerna, you said about the state does not recognize these as Armenians. I think there is also ambiguity in that as well. I just opened the interview transcription that I had in 2017, I guess, with one of the prominent Armenian schools principals. And she says, I haven't looked at the law itself, Ohannes might have, and so you might correct, but she says that in the law, it says that the children who is accepted to the Armenian school, Ermeni asıllı TC vatandaşı. So Ermeni asıllı, it says he should, and this helps me to answer Chris's question as well, because there's TC vatandaşı there as well. So the law says, according to this principle, that someone can become a student in an Armenian school if he or she is a citizen of the Turkish Republic, Ermeni asıllı, of Armenian origin. So it doesn't even say Ermeni Cemaat, it doesn't say the Armenian Cemaat, Armenian community, in the sense of the religious community, which makes me think that the law until 2008 or 9, as Ohannes mentioned, when the educational ministry used to decide, they use these codes 1, 2, 3, which speaks about the asıl, speaks about the lineage rather than the religious, the religious belonging. And that is where, and I think that scandal that Ohannes is mentioning is, I think, was a case in which the person was actually, if I'm wrong, please correct me, I might be wrong, because there are too many questions. The person was reconverted, but then it didn't match the code, saying that, okay, this person has reconverted and is, legally, it's really ambiguous. In what sense? In which legal context? If we're following the religiously speaking, legally Armenian, but she or he is not Ermeni asıllı. And that is how the code issue was, made public. That there's another way of categorizing people in Turkey as well, which brings me back to that issue: is the state really, and to what extent has the state de-Armenized these people? So it has, or it tried to, in terms of their self-identification, or crushing that sense of Armenianness or Armenian identity, but in its own understandings of them, they still are Armenian. Because they are asıllı, Ermeni asıllı, and so they are problematic, they are dangerous for the completeness of the Turkish nation, and so on and so on. Just to answer Chris's question, because the law says TC vatandaşı, the Armenian migrants from the Republic of Armenia were not legally, it was not legally possible for them to attend the Armenian schools. Now, they are Christian Armenians, they are Ermeni asıllı, although that is not probably in the state's registries, but they are not TC vatandaşı, they are not Turkish citizens. But there was lobbying on the part of the Christian Armenian community representatives and institutions, the Patriarchate, which eventually made it possible for children of migrants from the Republic of Armenia to attend these schools, but only to attend with just an honorary degree at the very end, which does not work anywhere. So now there are some migrant children going to the schools of the community schools, but when they graduate with that certificate, they cannot go to Boğaziçi or Bilgi or wherever, any university. It's not recognized. So it's, again, something in between.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I don't know whether,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether it differs, but almost the exact language of the law is that, let me first state in Turkish, bu okullarda Ermeni azınlığa mensup Türkiye Cumhuriyeti vatandaşları okuyabilir. If I try to translate it, only those kids who belong to Armenian community and Turkish citizens. So both excludes two groups at the same time: non-citizen Armenians, and, let's say, non-Armenian citizens. So both of these groups are excluded, let's say, at the same time by this phrase.
Yeah, thanks for correcting. In that case, the principle was, I don't know why, She presented it as the asıllı. And
Because
if
it's
that
the
is the
same thing.
case,
Because I think
But-
she means the same thing. I mean, they can be.
Yeah. That's why I said I don't know to what extent it differs. Asıllı or mensup. Maybe asıllı, as you say, more refers to lineage, to the past. But when you say mensup, it means belonging to that community. But belongingness does not just or is not birthed just on a single day. It also refers to a collective characteristics. But again, not asıllı but mensup. But as I say, it's debatable. It differs or not.
Okay.
Okay.
So let me open this up now, the panel, to the audience. There was one question that someone wanted to ask live. I don't remember who that person was.
Yeah, it was me.
Yes,
Thanks
please.
for possibility to give some question. It was a really very interesting presentation, Hrag, Papasyan. But I just want to clarify for me, because we are going to start in Armenia a huge nationwide survey concerning historical memory and identity, Armenian identity. So for me, it's really interesting. What is for Hamshena Hayer, for Hamshen Armenians, what is the code of identification, national identification? Because judging by our previous surveys done in Armenia, for our people, on the first place is nationality of parents, mainly father and mother, which is interesting. Then blood, language, religious, country of birth, and so on. But very interesting, are the same range of elements of national identity for the Hamshena Hayer, or something different? Maybe just self-orientation, self-identification is main for them, thinking about himself as an Armenian. I don't know if you know, it will be very interesting to compare imagination, national identity in Hamshena Hayer or Muslim Armenians and Armenian Armenians. So it's just short question.
thank you for the question. I'll try to be short as well. It really depends on the perspective, in whose perspective. In the state's perspective, official, at the visible level, official categorization is religious. And because the Hamshen Armenians, I'll come to that in a second, because that's also important to
you
clarify.
mean just in Turkey,
Yeah.
just in Turkey, state vision from the Turkish officials?
From the Turkish official vision, they are non-Armenians.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's not same in other countries.
Sorry?
It is not same in other countries, because in Turkey, they during the population surveys, they take account only religions, even not nationality, but belonging to the some of religions.
Yes, so the Turkish state does not have censuses that count, the different ethnic groups as such, or its legal organization, its legal institutional organization is based on the Muslim majority, and then the non-Muslim. It's not even Christian minority, right? It's non-Muslim minorities, which include the Christian, the Armenians, the Jews, the Greeks. Yeah. So the Hamshens, in that sense, looked from the point of view of the state, are just a local population, Muslim population. Okay, when it comes to their self-identification, that's what I was trying to say. First of all, not all of them are Hamshena Hais. Not all Hamshens claim to be Hai, claim to be Armenian or identify as Armenian. Some of them identify as Turks. And in this case, not just religiously, some of them would go, they would go back to some, or speak about some lineage from Central Asia and so on and so on. I'm not arguing whether that is correct or not, historically speaking. But some others say we are not Turkish, but we are not Armenian, we are just Hemshin. So putting forth this new ethnic identity. Some of them, yes, do claim to be Armenian, do say, yes, we are in reality Armenian. And those who say so not on religion, not based on religion, based on mostly history and culture. Culture is important in their case, especially in terms of language, because they realize that their language is a dialect of Armenian. Of course, there are debates about the language itself within the Hamshen community. Some who follow the Turkish nationalist, literature, trying to argue or falsify, in fact, the language, trying to argue that in reality it's a Turkish language. It has just borrowed only a few words from Armenian, which is obviously not the case. But then yet others would say this is Armenian. So I don't know if I really was able to answer the question.
No, thank you. It's interesting. So the religious on the first part, because language not so important as I understand. Blood is not so important, parents are not so important, but religious important, and self-identification maybe on the first place, if I understand you right.
Just to clarify something, Turkish censuses in general, since the 65 census, does not ask for even religion.
Even religion, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is the reason why we don't know how many Armenians, even non-hidden, openly Christian Armenians, live in Turkey. I mean, we have other ways of measuring, more or less having an estimate, but it's a policy to be blind, difference blind, or supposedly neutral, therefore, to religious and ethnic differences.
But if I can quickly...
Are now Turkish census include the question about ethnicity or nationality, or only just religion and that's all?
Not even language.
Let me clarify. Until, as you say, 1965, it's a correct date, but until that, after that day, they asked it, but they stopped publicize. The statistics after 1965, and in 1985 they stopped completely to ask these questions about mother tongue, ethnicity, and let's say religion, because a special court, which is Turkish Devlet Güvenlik Mahkemesi, state security court, opened lawsuits against the Office of Statistics on the grounds that what they did was to divide country. It's a threat. I mean, asking these questions, in censuses, constitute a risk of secession, a risk of division in the country. So this was a threat openly coming from judiciary. After that date, the bureau, let's say, statistical bureau, stopped asking this question. So that's why today, I don't know if state had some secret, let's say, work for this, but I don't think so, because it was a huge, let's say, initiative. That's why today we don't know the exact distribution in terms of ethnicity and religion of Turkish population.
Anyone else from the audience that would like to ask their questions live? If not, I'm going to turn to the chat. A couple of questions on the chat. Just ask you if the panelists think that the Armenian community in Turkey will survive or not. Just take it the way you want to take it. And
how many Armenians are in Turkey now? How many? By the official data, it's about 64,000 Armenians. I mean, official Turkish data, they mentioned that something around 64,000 Armenians living in Turkey nowadays. Is it correct? Is it really?
Yes.
Because of exactly the reason I mentioned, nobody knows exactly. Nobody knows exactly how many Armenians, citizen Armenians, are living in Turkey. But everybody repeats this number 50,000, 60,000. But it becomes a myth. Because everybody repeats. I also repeat time to time. But it becomes just a saying that there are around 50 or 60,000 Armenians. But what I mention as a solid, if you like, statistics, there are around 3,000 students totally at Armenian schools. But of course, some Armenian families send their kids to other schools, private schools or public schools. So the number of students at Armenian schools either would not be a certain indicator, a definite indicator of Armenian population, but the total number of Armenian students at Armenian schools are around 3,000, if this is an sign or, let's say, a clue to guess the total number.
Okay, I just saw on the chat that there was a question from Irena Varjabetian. Is she still with us? I think she wanted.
No, I think she left.
Okay, I think.
I'm
she's
here.
here.
I'm here.
She's here.
I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, it's not really a question. I hope you don't mind. It's just one of my experiences. You know, I have met some people on Facebook who are hidden Armenians. When Herag was saying hidden from who, they are extremely scared that anybody in their community, they know that they have Armenian roots. So, I mean, this one guy, it took him 2-3 months to tell me that his father was an Islamized Armenian. He was so scared to even tell me. So, and of course, these are, you know, in the Anatolia area, you know, in Marash province. And another person, you know, he told me his mother is Armenian. She was from Zeytun, but he says, if my friends know that, I might get hanged. I mean, can you imagine the fear they are living under, which is extremely disturbing for me. Thank you for this panel.
Thank you, Irena. I think we have Stepan Asturian with us.
Yes.
Question, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First, I would like to thank the panelists for a very enlightening, session. I had a question. Can we look at those problems that have been mentioned from the perspective of power relation? That is the concept of domination, basically, and citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen in a supposedly secular state, laïcité? Well, in France, to be a citizen, whether you are a Buddhist, you venerate birds or whatever, once you are French, it's a secular state, you have equal rights. You can attend any school anywhere, whenever you want, and it's better for that school not to exclude you. So we have the veneer of this supposedly secular state. We have a concept of citizenship, which, so far as I'm concerned, we see the first steps emerging and failing with the Tanzimat, basically. You know, you can be a citizen of Turkey, whether you are ethnically Armenian, apostolic, or whatever, but you are not going to be a Turkish citizen, because to be a real citizen, you need to be Sunni Muslim. So there is a whole set of cover-ups with westernized concepts. And once you dig in that, all that comes out is the concept of domination, dominating various groups. So that was my first comment, and maybe lead for your own comments. You are the specialists. The second point I would like to raise is this issue of the Treaty of Lausanne. You know, I am wondering to what extent the Treaty of Lausanne has not, in fact, encouraged and endorsed the eternal ghettoization of non-Muslims in modern Turkey. And thanks again for your very interesting talks.
May I?
Yes. And then
Yeah,
Chris,
I,
like.
okay. Yeah, basically I agree with Professor Astroyan, but let me put some comments and details on it. First of all, I think we should look at the secularization or secularism in Turkey. I would say, I would say there is no secularism in Turkey in that sense, because what we see rather is instrumentalization of secularism, indeed, to, as Professor Astroyan says, dominate, or I would say contain, in basically two groups. One is Islamic groups and Islamic politics, and the other is minority groups. I mean, to repeat myself, indeed, what we see or what Turkish state has practiced until this date, I think, is not secularism, but they used instrument discourse of secularism, again, to contain, on the one hand, this Islamic politics and Islamic groups, and contain this non-Muslim, let's say, Christian and Jewish minorities. Because, I mean, just giving for some examples, how can a state that established directors of religious affairs as early as in 1924, which promotes not even a religion, but if a certain sect, Sunni Hanefi sect, can be, I mean, secular. I mean, since 1924, this state has had this directorate of religious affairs, promoting, allocating financial and other sources for the sake of a certain Islamic sect. Or for that sake, we can say that how can a state who puts compulsory courses of religion on public curriculum be secular in that sense, okay? So we can multiply these examples. So, but I would say that indeed secularism has been instrumentalized, as you say, dominate, or I would say contain this, and for the sake of interest of states from their perspective, okay, for the well-being of state, or for the preserving the power of state over others. And for Lausanne, I would say basically, Lausanne does two things. On the one hand, it guarantees that these Christian and Jewish communities would face no discrimination from the state. In other words, state would not restrict their activities, they would not restrict their rights, and they would have same rights, equal rights as the rest of the citizens, Muslim citizens. This is the one thing Lausanne guarantees. The other things is a bunch of positive rights. We can say that the state guarantees that it would support non-Muslim institutions, I mean, educational, philanthropic, social, I don't know, institutions to, let's say, keep minority identities alive or make them survive, okay? So they also promote promises, if you like, a bunch of positive rights. But when we look at the actuality, the events, we see that Turkish state violated these closures, these articles of Lausanne Treaty, again, as early as 1924-25, as for example, they put a travel ban on these non-Muslim communities, etc. And again, until this day, they used, again, secularism and Lausanne Treaty whenever it serves to provide, to keep, as you say, the dominance or hegemony of state. For example, when we demand that, come on, let's issue a law which defines Armenian Patriarchate, its authorities demand, they say that, no, this is a secular state and it would be against secularism to issue such a law defining a religious institution. But on the other hand, as I say, there has been a Directorate of Religious Affairs since 1924, okay? Or, for example, when we say that these Armenian schools should be supported from a financial, let's say, support from public budget. They said that it is written in Lausanne that these institutions should, let's say, exist on their expenses. Because, you know, yes, there is a statement in Lausanne. I mean, it says that these institutions should find their own money. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. This is not word by word. But on the other hand, there is another statement in Lausanne Treaty which stipulates that these institutions should be given a share from public budget. So in this sense, Lausanne has a contradictory position, but the Turkish state, use it selectively, okay? Whenever it serves its own purposes. So basically, yes, I would say I agree that indeed both secularism, to repeat myself, both secularism and Lausanne Treaty have been again instrumentalized for the sake of state, let's say, dominance over people, not only Armenians, but over just some, let's say, marginalized groups. Thank you.
So let's take Chris, if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts, and it's lovely to see and hear from you, Professor Historian. What a wonderful opportunity to answer this question. So with Lausanne, I would say the one thing that the concept we've spent the least amount of time talking about tonight actually is minority. And I think that to sort of get at the question of ghettoization a little bit, you know, there's a bind in the concept of minority status to begin with, right? Because all of these, you know, as Ohanas has just said, enumerating certain positive rights that are supposed to come along with this status, of course, also, you know, singles you out. There is an inherent bind in minority status and in the idea of minority rights, which in the sort of the history of the use of rights language in general, the sort of, you know, the story goes, right, that, you know, the interwar period was the period of minority rights, and among other things, the experience of World War II led to the abandonment, that actually minority rights did nothing. They did not in the end secure the safety and security of people, and therefore now we have human rights. Now, you know, plenty of ink has been spilled on the, you know, criticism of human rights as well, but I think what is sort of specific to the minority right is that bind, is that you find yourself in a bind for being singled out for the protection already, therefore, you know, requires a certain kind of special status. And I think, you know, I've already laid my cards on the table with Talal Asad, but I think the person who has done the most to sort of help us think about this in a very parallel case is the work of Sabah Mahmoud about the Coptic Christians. So it's Religious Difference in a Secular Age, a Minority Report. And she's really worked through this bind, thinking about Coptic Christians in Egypt, which I think have important parallels for thinking about the Armenians in Turkey, especially around this question of minority status. So I would say, you know, a basic yes to that I think by offering certain provisions, you by grounding it in a kind of minority status, you are of course opening it up to the constant demarcation and therefore ghettoization of any group. Just briefly on the secularism question, again with my cards on the table with Asad, I come at this from a different way of thinking about it, which is that it's not necessarily that we need to adjudicate whether or not Turkey has been secular, because in the words of another Assadian scholar, Hussein Agrama, what he calls it the active principle of secularism, which basically leaves the decision for the divide between religion and secular to the state. So the decisionism, obviously, this is going to be a slightly different kind of theoretical lineage from thinking, you know, hegemony or domination. And, you know, decisionism has its own, you know, issues and problems. But I think it gets at something similar, which is that ultimately it is the power of the state that gets to make those decisions, right? So when Ohanas says, you know, on the one hand, we have the Diyanet, and on the other hand, we say, oh, no, how could there be a patriarchate, right? That in fact demonstrates that the power of decision over the boundary between religious or secular, or what counts as religious and therefore is going to be, you know, off limits from the secular state, the power devolves to the state. So I think in a way it's a different theoretical way of saying what Ohana said, right? To wield it, opportunistically is one way of thinking about it. But from another way that I think maybe it helps, because I think the thinking around decision and law is useful for all its problems. It harks back a lot to Schmidt, who is a difficult person to sort of use, but the idea of the decision, I think, does point to the power of the state over this possibility, and in a similar way to thinking about it being opportunistic or something, it demonstrates that it is in fact ultimately the state that gets to say, no, in this case, the DNet, that's fine. But in the case of the Patriarchate, no, that's religious and therefore, off limits.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. I would like to just add something on Lausanne and a little bit on secularization and the concept of minority. I think ghettoization is not necessarily a bad thing for Armenians who remained in post-Lausanne Turkey. I think otherwise they would have been fully assimilated and have become, like, the future would have become earlier, but it would arrive earlier and they would have turned into Turks. That's one thing. But the other thing here is the French-Turkey analogy doesn't work. Historically, Turkey tries to be friends, wants to be friends, like the French system, the difference blind, no minorities, everyone is French in the eye of the state and the law. Universally, the universalist sense of citizenship, it doesn't work because religion continues its career into the Republic via the Lausanne Treaty. And Lausanne is enforced. Lausanne's minority protections is something that the Turks did not want to give to its minorities, right? Because they thought of it as privileges, like the dhimmi privileges, like the previous privileges that led to the demise of the Ottomans, because they opened up a space for the great powers to intervene through their things, meddle, and bring up the total sinking of the ship. So for France, for the French, no one imposed on them these minorities. So a North African French-born person is legally French without any extra rights, right? So it is therefore also very different from the Turkish Armenian case. Is also, yes, Coptic Egyptians. I also have thought about this for a long time, but because there is legal pluralism in Egypt and there's none in Turkey, or like very, very restricted one, it's very different. Because there is their Lausanne Treaty is absent, meaning they are not categorized similarly as minority, because why? They continue in their Copts in Egypt, they continue their canonical law when it comes to their marriage, divorce, which is not inheritance and others. But since 1926, so this is this half-baked version of Turkey trying to be everything and end up being nothing, actually, because we don't have legal pluralism, but there is something called the church, which will then decide who can marry whom to a certain extent, who can be baptized or not, right? That's one thing. The other thing is that I know Hagop Papazian appeared on the screen. I think it's time for us to end this conversation. I would like to leave the question of if the community will survive or not unanswered, and consciously so. I think all of us sense what the answer is, but it's better not to be, I think, expressed. Anything else that, Hagop, you wanted to add as we wrap up the panel?
Well, thank you very much. This was a very interesting discussion. And I know it can go on, but we have passed the 2-hour limit already. And that I thank every one of you, Harag and Ohannes and Chris, and especially Lerna for this excellent moderation. And let's keep the discussion going afterwards. I mean, you guys are experts, and you will, I'm sure, communicate with each other and continue your research.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
thank you the whole audience who participated and stayed with us all the time. Now, our next panel will be on modern media tools and the Armenian language. And it will probably be sometime at the end of June. We will let you know. In other words, how can modern tools be used to enhance and continue the Armenian language and improve the Armenian language? Thank you very much. And I hope to see you at our 30th anniversary conference and banquet. Please participate and RSVP. Thank you very much and
Yeah.
goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.